They called it a God-fearing homestead. But when a merchant slips on ice and crawls toward the Harlan basement doors, what he finds chained to the walls is beyond redemption. 10 children, barely breathing, mouths sewn shut, iron rings cut into their ankles, watch him in total silence. In the flicker of lantern light, one nameplate hangs empty. The 10th. Behind a wall, a branded Bible lies open to a verse about burning suns in fire. What kind of man preaches obedience from a cellar like this? And who was the child that never made it out? If you would like me to continue creating stories so that this history, which is not taught in schools, is not forgotten, please subscribe to this channel. Write in the comments where you are watching from. Dawn broke cold over Marion County that Monday morning, July 14th, 1884. Elias Cutler's tannery, a weathered structure on the outskirts of Caledonia, stood quiet except for the crackle of the newly lit forge fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across rows of stretched hides, and tools hung with precise care on the workshop walls. Elias paused in his morning routine, calloused hands gripping the forge poker. Josiah should have returned last night. The delivery to the Harlan place was a simple 5-mile ride he'd made before. The boy knew to be back before dark. At 8:30, hoofbeats approached from the west. Elias rushed outside to find Josiah's pony trembling in the yard, sides heaving and slick with sweat. The reins hung in tatters, one stirrup twisted sideways. The saddlebag gaped open, empty of the carefully wrapped hides meant for the Harlans. Sheriff Eldon Griggs arrived within the hour, his cavalry coat buttoned against the morning chill. He studied the pony's torn tack while Elias paced the yard, describing how Josiah had left Sunday afternoon, carrying 6 cured deerskins for Abner Harlan's winter stores. "Boy's punctual as a church bell," Elias said, voice rough. "Never been late before." Griggs mounted up, following the dirt paths that wound west toward the Harlan property. Fresh hoof prints marked the soft earth until the trail turned to gravel near the Whetstone River. There the tracks vanished, scattered among countless others. The Harlan homestead sat silent under the climbing sun, its weather-grayed boards and sagging porch speaking of neglect. Abner Harlan met them at the door in his preacher's black coat, 4 sons arranged behind him like fence posts, gaunt, barefoot, eyes downcast. "The Cutler boy never arrived," Harlan stated, voice flat as a chapel floor. "We waited until sunset, thinking he might come." "The Lord knows we need those hides." Griggs noted details in his leather-bound notebook. No sign of the deerskins, no mud from the boys' boots on the porch, no glimpse of Harlan's daughters through the windows. The sons never shifted, never spoke, unless directly addressed by their father. Dr. Mallory, the county physician, joined the growing search party by midday. He examined the pony's injuries, scraped flanks, bleeding fetterlocks, and suggested the animal had spooked, perhaps at a snake, throwing Josiah into the swift-running Whetstone. For 3 days, men dragged the river with nets and poles. They found nothing. No body, no saddlebag, no trace of the missing hides. The search expanded to abandoned barns and hollow trees, places a wounded boy might seek shelter. Still nothing. Friday's Marion Gazette carried the story on page 6, wedged between notices for a church social and auction results. Missing boy near Whetstone. Josiah Cutler, age 11, disappeared Sunday, last while delivering goods west of Caledonia. Any information should be reported to Sheriff E. Griggs. That evening, in the quiet of his office, Sheriff Griggs opened his logbook. Under July 14th, 1884, he added a final note beside Abner Harlan's name. A single question mark in heavy black ink. The next morning, a river patrol found a rusted branding iron half buried in mud near the crossing. Its face bore an unusual mark, a cross surrounded by rays, like a rising sun. Griggs logged it simply as unidentified cattle tool and placed it in the evidence cabinet, where it would sit unremarked for 5 more months. Sunday's late July heat pressed down on the Methodist chapel in Caledonia like a wool blanket. Reverend Silas Kempton dabbed his brow with a handkerchief as he delivered his sermon on the Book of Job, his voice carrying through open windows to the drowsy congregation. Wooden fans fluttered in the stuffy air, creating a whispered rhythm beneath his words. In the third pew, Martha Gleaves leaned forward to whisper to Mrs. Whittaker, her voice carrying more than she intended. Abner Harlan's taken in 2 more children. Saw them myself, trudging behind his wagon on market day. Thin as corn stalks they were. Kempton's hand tightened on his Bible. The disappearance of Josiah Cutler still weighed heavy on the town's conscience. After services, he gathered a stack of torn hymnal pages, legitimate church business that would justify a visit to the isolated Harlan property. The afternoon sun cast long shadows when Kempton's buggy approached the Harlan's gate. A boy appeared from behind a weathered fence post, small for his age, dressed in rough homespun. Angry red flesh peeked above his collar, weeping clear fluid onto the fabric. "I'm Thaddeus," the boy said, voice barely above a whisper. "Father's in the barn." Kempton followed Thaddeus across the packed earth yard. Empty washing lines creaked in the breeze. A wagon stood half-loaded behind the barn, and something caught the Reverend's eye. A wooden box, roughly 6 feet long, its boards fresh cut and unmarked. Abner Harlan emerged from the barn shadows, his preacher's coat dusty with chaff. Reverend Kempton. An unexpected blessing. His tone suggested otherwise. "Brother Harlan, I've brought replacement pages for your hymnal." Kempton held out the papers. "I heard you've taken in new wards?" "The Lord sends those in need of correction." Harlan's beard twitched. "Children whose spirits require the furnace." As if summoned, 2 small figures appeared in the barn doorway, a boy and girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old. Their feet were bare despite the rocky ground, their faces blank as unpainted china. Neither spoke when Kempton offered a gentle greeting. "They're shy of strangers," Harlan said, "but the Lord's work cannot wait on comfort." Kempton's eyes travelled again to the wooden box. A coffin for winter stores? A shipping crate? Harlan's voice hardened. For sending preserved goods to mission houses downstate. The Reverend nodded, though his stomach churned. That evening, he penned a careful report to the County Poor Board, detailing his concerns about the children's condition and Harlan's unusual practices. The letter joined dozens of others in the overcrowded filing system, where it would sit unread through harvest season. Later that night, by lamplight, Kempton wrote a second letter. This one he addressed to the Methodist district office in Columbus, describing everything he'd witnessed: the children's silence, Thaddeus's wound, the strange box in the wagon. He sealed it with wax, dated it July 21st, 1884, and placed it in his desk drawer, intending to mail it after further investigation. The letter would remain there, unmailed, until his death in 1901. In the County Poor Board's ledger for that week, a single-line entry read, "Disbursement to A.H. for spiritual instruction of invalid orphans, $6.75. The August sun beat down mercilessly as Leland Poe's mule-drawn cart rattled past Caledonia's town limits. His weathered canvas awning sagged with the weight of hardware merchandise, rows of tin pots gleaming dully, kegs of nails, and carefully packed crates of lantern glass bound for the growing markets of Mansfield. At the crossroads near the Whetstone River, Poe consulted his creased leather ledger. The Harlan farm lay ahead, a potential stop he'd marked in pencil. His mule's ears pricked forward as they approached the property's sagging fence line. The farmhouse hulked against the afternoon sky, its windows dark despite the hour. Poe pulled his cart to a stop, the wheels crunching on gravel. "Hardware!" he called out, his merchant's voice carrying across the yard. "Nails and tools for sale." The front door creaked open. A tall figure emerged, Abner Harlan himself, dressed in his customary black coat despite the heat. He raised one hand, not in welcome but in warning. "We require nothing," Harlan called flatly. "Move along." Poe opened his mouth to protest. Surely every farm needed nails, tools, basic supplies, but something in Harlan's stance made him hesitate. Behind the preacher, a pale face appeared briefly at an upper window, then vanished like smoke. "Good day, then," Poe managed, turning his mule back toward the main road. The next morning, Jacob Werner, a local farmhand, discovered Poe's cart overturned in a drainage ditch 2 miles north of the Harlan property. Hardware lay scattered across the muddy ground, bent pots, shattered lantern glass, nails glinting in the early light. The mule was gone. Werner found Poe himself, an hour later, half-conscious and dragging himself through the wet grass toward town. His right leg was twisted at an impossible angle, compound fracture visible through torn trousers. Blood matted his hair. "Children," Poe mumbled as Werner lifted him into a wagon. "In chains, their mouths sewn shut." By noon, Sheriff Griggs stood in Dr. Mallory's surgery, watching the physician set Poe's leg. The merchant thrashed in morphine-induced delirium, still muttering about underground horrors. "Fever dreams," Dr. Mallory declared, tightening a splint. "Common with severe trauma. He'll talk sense when the morphine wears off." Griggs nodded, but something made him examine Poe's rescued ledger. Among neat columns of sales figures and inventory lists, a single line stood out from July. "Refused at Harlan Place." Heard crying. Storm doors ajar. They moved Poe to a room at Miller's Inn to recover. That evening, Mary Whitmore, who taught at the one-room schoolhouse, stopped by to leave a basket of fresh bread. She found Poe awake, clear-eyed despite his pain. "Miss Whitmore," he whispered, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "I need to tell someone who'll listen. In their cellar, I saw a girl, chained to the wall like an animal. Blood on her palms, fresh blood." Mary Whitmore left the inn in the gathering dusk. Instead of heading home, she walked straight to Notary Hillenbrand's office. Within the hour, Poe's testimony was recorded, notarized, and sealed, marked urgent for Circuit Judge Donohue's immediate attention. The mercury had plunged to 15 degrees below zero overnight, freezing the breath of Elwyn Foster's horse as he made his morning mail rounds west of Caledonia. Ice crystals floated in the air, catching the weak winter sun like suspended glass. Foster pulled his wool scarf tighter, checking his pocket watch, already an hour behind schedule due to the treacherous conditions. As he approached the Harlan property, something caught his eye. The basement storm doors lay splayed open at an odd angle, half buried in a drift of fresh snow. No footprints marked the white expanse. The doors must have been open all night. Foster reined his horse to a stop. Protocol dictated he should continue his route, but something about those gaping doors troubled him. He dismounted, boots crunching in the frozen crust as he approached the entrance. A faint sound drifted up from below, a groan, barely audible over the winter wind. Foster hesitated, then retrieved his mail carrier's lantern from his saddlebag. The brass fixture felt like ice in his gloved hands as he lit the wick. The wooden steps creaked under his weight. The lantern beam caught dancing motes of dust. Then something that made Foster's heart stop, a length of chain bolted to fieldstone walls. and another, and another. 10 children lay shackled to the basement walls. Their bodies were skeletal, clothes hanging in filthy rags. Most appeared unconscious or dead, skin grey in the weak light. Foster's lantern trembled as he took in the horrific scene. A boy's eyes flickered open, reflecting the flame like a cat's. Beside him, a girl slowly raised her head, revealing teeth filed to points. The basement reeked of iron, mildew, and stale urine, the accumulated misery of countless days in darkness. Foster stumbled backward up the stairs, nearly falling in his haste to escape. He swung himself onto his horse and rode hard for town, the image of those chained children burning in his mind. Sheriff Griggs was at his desk when Foster burst in, gasping out his discovery between frozen breaths. Within 2 hours, a posse of 20 men assembled outside the jailhouse. Deputies, farmers, shopkeepers, all armed and grim-faced. They found the Harlan house silent, smoke holes cold. No sign of Abner or his older children. The posse methodically searched each room, finding evidence of hasty departure. Drawers left open, food still on plates, Bible missing from its usual place. Deputy Williams discovered Thaddeus in the flour pantry, the door secured with a heavy iron padlock. The 11-year-old boy huddled in the corner, trembling violently. When they lifted him out, his shirt fell open, revealing a fresh brand on his shoulder. A cross surrounded by rays burned deep into his flesh. Dr. Mallory arrived as they were carrying the basement victims out on makeshift stretchers. He worked through the afternoon, documenting their conditions by lamplight in his leather-bound medical journal. His affidavit, written in precise script, detailed the evidence of prolonged starvation, systematic abuse, and ritualistic burning. The children's muscles had atrophied from confinement, their joints swollen from the constant weight of shackles. In the basement, Sheriff Griggs conducted his own inventory. 9 sets of chains lined the walls, but one iron ring stood empty, its bolt still firmly anchored in the stone. Beside it hung a wooden nameplate, the letters carved deep and dark. The 10th. Snow fell in thick curtains as County Commissioner Arnold Cobb pressed his official seal into red wax, marking the formal closure of the Harlan property. The document trembled slightly in his hands as Sheriff Griggs nailed it to the front door. Neither man spoke of the stench that drifted up from the basement. Inside, deputies worked methodically, cataloguing items in leather-bound ledgers. The kitchen yielded iron tools with strange modifications, tongs fitted with sharp teeth, branding irons of various sizes, leather straps studded with metal points. In the pantry, they found mason jars filled with murky brine. Deputy Williams held one to the lantern light, revealing what appeared to be preserved. Human tongues floating in the cloudy liquid. "Mark it down," Griggs ordered, his voice tight. Every jar, every tool. The parlor hearth contained heaps of grey ash, mixed with fragments of paper and cloth. Beside it stood Abner's reading chair, its arms worn smooth from use. A scorched Bible lay open on the seat, its pages brittle and torn at Ezekiel 16:20-21. The passage spoke of children sacrificed to false gods, the ink nearly obliterated by what looked like candle burns. Sheriff Griggs knelt by the hearth, running his fingers along the stonework until he found a loose brick. Behind it lay a thin leather journal, its pages filled with Abner's cramped handwriting. The entries detailed what he called purification rituals, methodical accounts of punishment inflicted on children who showed signs of spiritual rebellion. "Sheriff," Deputy Williams called from the study, "these documents, they're not right." The papers scattered across Abner's desk told a disturbing story. Church letterhead had been carefully forged, creating official-looking transfers from asylums and orphanages, but when cross-referenced with the names of the children found chained below, nothing matched. No census records, no institutional logs, no baptismal certificates could account for their origins. At the Marion County Infirmary, Dr. Mallory observed 2 of the surviving children as they compulsively drew on the walls with pieces of charcoal. The images were identical, crude, sunburst crosses positioned above what appeared to be fire pits. The children refused to speak, but continued drawing the same symbol over and over. Judge Merritt Donahue arrived from Delaware County that afternoon, his black coat dusted with snow. He ordered all the symbols photographed and compared against church records throughout the region. His clerk worked through stacks of donation ledgers, searching for any pattern that might reveal Abner's movements. The breakthrough came in a February 1882 record from a disbanded Methodist church near the Hardin County line. Among the monthly contributions was an entry that made the clerk's hand shake. Ebenezer H. Day, $30, for the Furnace Boys. The signature, when held against Abner's known handwriting from property deeds and tax records, showed unmistakable similarities. The precise slant of the letters, the distinctive way he formed his capital letters. It was the same hand. Judge Donahue examined the ledger himself, holding it close to his spectacles. "Make copies," he ordered. "Every page with this name. We'll need them for the trial." Frost coated the grass as Micah Tolliver hurried his horse toward the Marion County Sheriff's office. The itinerant preacher's weathered face was pale, his hands trembling as he dismounted. He had been traveling the circuit between Marion and Kenton when he witnessed something that made his blood run cold. "Sheriff Griggs," he called out, voice cracking. "There's something you need to see." Inside, Tolliver described what he'd observed near the old Methodist meeting house. A tall man with a thick gray beard leading 6 boys through the morning mist, all wearing identical black coats, moving like soldiers, went straight into that collapsed foundation cellar. Judge Donahue happened to be present, reviewing case files. He and Griggs exchanged glances, the same thought crossing their minds. Abner Harlan. By mid-morning, Griggs and Donahue arrived at the abandoned church site with 4 deputies. The structure had collapsed years ago, leaving only the stone foundation and a partial wall. Recent footprints marked the mud around the cellar entrance. "Still warm?" Griggs said, kneeling beside scattered ashes from a campfire. Half-eaten bread and apple cores lay nearby, along with tin cups bearing tooth marks. Judge Donahue examined the remaining wall, his fingers tracing crude etchings in the stone. Sunburst symbols, identical to those found in the Harlan basement, covered the surface. Below them, 9 distinct tally marks had been carved with some sharp implement. In the corner, barely visible, the initials T.H. "There," one deputy called out, pointing to a section of wooden flooring that didn't match the rest. A heavy iron ring protruded from one board. They pulled it open, revealing a second cellar below the first. The air that rose from the opening carried the metallic scent of blood. Sheriff Griggs descended first, lantern held high. The space below contained fresh horrors, dark stains on the packed earth floor, coils of rope fibers, and a single child's shoe caked with mud. In one corner lay a torn piece of black wool coat, the same material described in reports of the missing Hardin County boy. "Judge," Griggs called up, his voice tight, "you'll want to see these papers." Property records, pulled from the county courthouse, confirmed what they suspected. The meeting house had been purchased in 1883 by one Ebenezer H. Day, the same alias found in the church donation ledgers. By sunset, wanted notices were being drafted for telegraph offices across Ohio. The description was precise. Tall man, gray beard, traveling with multiple young boys in matching coats. Reward, $100 dead or alive. As they prepared to leave, a deputy's torch illuminated something behind the fallen pulpit, a boot half buried in rubble. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, they found a decomposing leather journal. Its pages contained meticulous records, towns visited, dates, and ages of children acquired between 1882 and 1884. 10 entries in total. The final page bore a single line that made Judge Donahue's hands shake as he read it aloud. The 10th was not his. She was borrowed. She remembers too much. Sheriff Griggs and 12 armed men surrounded the collapsed Methodist meeting house as the sun set behind bare trees. Smoke rose from a squat building behind the chapel ruins, an old smokehouse with boards nailed across its windows. Deputy Marshal Hayes held up his hand, signaling the others to hold position. The crunch of boots on frozen ground ceased. "Abner Harlan!" Griggs's voice carried across the clearing. "You're surrounded. Come out with your hands visible." Silence answered. Then came a sound that made several men reach for their revolvers, singing. Low and guttural, a hymn filtered through the smokehouse walls. 2 voices joined in unholy harmony. "Take positions," Griggs ordered. "Hayes, Morton, with me." They approached the structure from 3 sides. The padlocked door showed fresh scratch marks. Through gaps in the boards, lantern light flickered. The singing grew louder. "Last warning, Harlan." When no response came, Griggs nodded to Hayes, who swung his axe. The lock shattered. The door burst open. Inside, Abner Harlan knelt in filth, wearing a Union coat turned inside out. His son Malachi crouched beside him, both covered in soot and grime. The stench of spoiled meat and human waste filled the air. "The Lord judges all flesh," Abner said calmly, rising to his feet. "You have no authority here." Malachi lunged forward, wielding a spoon sharpened to a deadly point. Deputy Morton's revolver cracked once. The young man fell, clutching his chest. Blood spread across the packed earth floor. "Devil's servants!" Abner shrieked, throwing himself at the officers. It took 4 men to subdue him. As they dragged him out in irons, he continued screaming scripture, spittle flying from his cracked lips. At the Delaware County Jail, Judge Donahue ordered extraordinary precautions. 2 armed guards watched Harlan's cell day and night. The judge then began assembling evidence, dispatching clerks to gather church records from every circuit where Abner had preached. The documents painted a damning picture. Multiple congregations had raised concerns about Harlan's improper correction of children in his care. A deacon in Sandusky had written of cruel disciplines masked as spiritual guidance. Yet no formal charges were ever filed. Church authorities had simply moved him along, passing the evil downstream. When the trial began in early April, Prosecutor William Blackburn presented a devastating array of evidence. Leland Poe's sworn affidavit described the chained children in vivid detail. Church ledgers showed donations under Harlan's alias. The travel journal documented his movements between towns, collecting vulnerable youth. Thaddeus Harlan was brought forward, shirt collar lowered, to reveal the sunburst cross branded into his flesh. The boy wouldn't speak, but his scar spoke volumes. Abner sat unmoved through the testimony, his grey beard matted, eyes fever-bright. When called to answer the charges, he rose slowly. "All flesh is corrupt," he intoned. "These vessels were defiled at birth. Through flame they are remade. Through pain they are purified." His court-appointed defender requested a delay to examine new evidence. Judge Donahue denied the motion. Instead, he allowed the prosecution one final exhibit, a rusted branding iron recovered from the Harlan basement. Blackburn held it up for the jury to see. The cruel metal stamp matched Thaddeus's scar exactly. That evening, as jailers searched Harlan before returning him to his cell, they discovered something sewn into his coat lining. A folded ledger page, yellow with age, contained a single name, a girl's name that matched none of the children rescued from his cellar. Sunlight filtered through tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Clara Morton, age 11, sat rigid in the witness chair, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't spoken a word since her rescue from the Harlan cellar, but today, Judge Donahue hoped she might break her silence. Dr. Mallory stood beside her, notebook in hand. "Clara, can you tell us about the other children?" Clara's lips moved, but no sound emerged. The courtroom leaned forward. Again, her mouth formed shapes, the same pattern, over and over. "She's saying a name," Dr. Mallory announced, squinting. "Delia, she's saying Delia." Judge Donahue rifled through his papers. "Sheriff Griggs, do we have a Delia listed among the victims?" "No, Your Honor. Not in the infirmary records or coroner's findings." The revelation sparked murmurs through the gallery. Abner Harlan, chained at the defense table, showed no reaction. That afternoon, a letter arrived by express post from Findlay, Ohio. Mrs. Sarah Kendrick wrote that she'd read about the Harlan case in the Ohio State Journal. Her niece, Delia Atchison, 9 years old, had disappeared in the autumn of 1883 while traveling to the Findlay Methodist Orphanage after her mother's death. Judge Donahue dispatched a clerk to retrieve Delia's records from the Findlay School District. By evening, the girl's Sunday school notebook lay on his desk. The penmanship was exceptional for a child, precise, slanting letters with distinctive loops. "Look here," Sheriff Griggs said, placing the notebook beside a sketch of the meeting-house cellar wall. The TH initials carved there shared the same unique flourishes. But Delia was a girl. We assumed the 10th child was male, like the others. More survivors came forward. 8-year-old Peter Walsh drew a picture in charcoal, a figure with cropped hair wearing boys' clothes, hands bound in front rather than chained to the wall. When asked who it was, he wrote DELIA in shaky letters. 10-year-old Sarah Whitman, still recovering at the Marion Infirmary, described a girl who watched us, not chained, and nodded when we could eat. Judge Donahue gathered the evidence in his chambers. "She wasn't just another victim," he told Sheriff Griggs. "Harlan turned her into something else, a keeper, perhaps, or an enforcer." That evening, as clerks organized court documents, a torn ledger page surfaced from the Harlan evidence box. It contained a list of names, each marked with a single cross. But one entry stood apart. Delia Atchison, dagger, 2 crosses, different from all the rest. In his cell, Abner Harlan scratched another tally mark into the wall with his fingernail and hummed an old hymn about purifying flame. Dawn broke bitter cold over the county courthouse yard. 300 people stood in silence, their breath fogging in the winter air. No children were present. The town fathers had forbidden it. Sheriff Griggs adjusted his collar against the chill, watching as Reverend Kempton opened his Bible with trembling hands. Abner Harlan emerged from the jailhouse door, walking steady between 2 deputies. His grey beard had been trimmed for the occasion, and he wore a clean black coat that hung loose on his frame. His eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the crowd without emotion. "Psalm 94, Reverend Kempton announced, voice carrying across the yard. "O Lord God, to whom vengeance belongeth, show thyself." Harlan mounted the wooden steps one at a time, his chains rattling with each move. Judge Donahue stood at the edge of the platform, document in hand. "Have you any final words?" "The fire purifies," Harlan said clearly. "The steel remains." At precisely 7:15 a.m., the trap door opened. The crowd remained silent even after the prison doctor declared death at 7:28 a.m. By noon, Judge Donahue sat in his chambers, signing the final orders. The Harlan property would be burned to prevent souvenir hunters. The surviving children, those who hadn't already vanished into state homes or charity schools, would be placed in supervised care. The physical evidence would be preserved at the Marion Historical Society. The basement chains, the branding iron, ledgers, and other artifacts of horror. Sheriff Griggs submitted his retirement papers that afternoon. "I've seen enough," he told Judge Donahue, placing his badge on the desk. "Let younger men chase shadows." 7 years passed. In spring of 1893, at an estate sale in Findlay, a bundle of papers surfaced in an old traveling case. Among them, a single page of sermon notes in Abner Harlan's distinctive hand, dated after his arrest. The auctioneer read it aloud. "Only fire makes steel. Only steel makes obedience. The 10th waits still." The page was authenticated by Judge Donahue himself, though he had long since moved to the state Supreme Court. It joined the other artifacts behind glass at the Marion Historical Society. Today, visitors can still see the display case in the County Museum's North Wing. Inside, arranged on black velvet, a rusted chain that once held a child to a basement wall, the infamous branding iron, its sunburst cross pattern still clearly visible, and propped against the back, a simple wooden nameplate, its edges blackened by old smoke. It bears a single word: Delia. The official record shows no trace of Delia Acheson after her placement in the Harlan house. No grave was ever found, no remains identified, and Thaddeus Harlan, the youngest son who carried the brand, vanished from a Cleveland orphanage in 1889, leaving behind only a torn hymnal page and one mud-caked boot. The museum curator turns the lights off each evening at 6 o'clock. In the darkness, the iron artifacts gleam dully behind their glass, holding their secrets close.